Hello everybody, thanks for coming. I've got to keep it fairly brief because we've got a full day today, but if you're here, and I mean I know a lot of you, but if you don't know about the traditional song forum, the cards are on the table back there, or if you want to know or join us, because it's free, Sean and Martin at the back there. Hands up, Sean and Martin. Martin will be busy with his cameras, so speak to Sean. She's the most presentable one of us in the TSF anyway, so do speak to Sean if you'd like to find anything else about anything about the TSF or to join us. We have to say thank you to, and I always get their name wrong, the Contemporary Folklore Research Centre for hosting us today and for doing all the local organising. Julia, you've already met, Jessica on the door, Kath.
She's gone to the union, I think, already to see if she infects
Kath's
the
gone
She's
already.
gone to carry the can of the wars.
If you want to know about the work of the centre, then find Kath when she gets back. I'll introduce her again later. Ballad partners, same people as the TSF with different hats on, have books for sale. I'll be plugging those again before when we come back from lunch probably. So today we're talking, today's conference is called A Sense of Place, which when we first suggested this conference, you know, places within songs or places to do with song, A Sense of Place ended up as our title for the day. But I'm a bit disappointed, it's a bit mundane, A Sense of Place. So we knocked around a few other ideas. I was particularly thought we could call it A Place for Everything, and everything in its place. And that's sort of relevant. But then we knocked around other sort of things to do with places, place settings. Well, that's good, but place mats, that doesn't really work or anything. But place your bets, that would be good. If anybody was talking about sporting ballads, but they're not. So place your bets has gone. But there are people talking about emigration. So no place like home. That would have been a good title. Or No Place to Call Home. Or Going Places, we could have called it that. And that would have included the emigration people. Place of business doesn't really work. Place of residence. But place of execution. That's more our style. We could have a whole day talking about murder ballads, place of execution, we could call it. And you could say that the victims of those murders were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So on small pieces of paper, tell me which one you prefer to call our meeting today instead of A Sense of Place. Or think of your own with place in the title. Same time, same place. We could do it again next year. Or my favourite, which I'm told works, but I've never used this line, Your Place or Mine. So I think all of those cover, between them, they cover all the papers that we've got today. And we'd better crack on, hadn't we? As I said, we've got a full day. So is on first.
No, I'm not.
No, you're not.
Steve.
Steve is on first. So I know what I'm doing. Steve.
Okay.
Round of applause for Steve, because he's on first.
Yeah, I've been reading around the subject a little bit lately. Helps me to go to sleep on a night. And I've come across this piece by Karin Bockland Lagapula, some of you have heard of, David had, of Aristotle University Thessaloniki, and it doesn't say when it was written, I did write it down. Anyway, there's a little quote that just opens the afternoon up, morning up. What makes a ballad seem historical is the powerful stylistic presence of a semantic register of realism. This, upon closer examination, is found to consist of three main codes: frequent use of real or realistic geography, mainly place names, an elaborate set of personal names and titles, and careful indications of the time when particular events are said to have taken place. No actual, it is in brackets, no actual historical truth is implied by the use of this vocabulary, though of course historical truth is not excluded either. So, the rest of the 20 minutes is from here, and I'd like you to imagine yourselves as a ballad writer back in about 1750. At that time, some of the bigger cities, of course, in the 17th century, London was the main place where all the ballads were coming from, where the ballad writers were, where all the printers were. But by about the middle of the 18th century, you got like Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, places like that. Bristol were printing ballads themselves. Imagine this ballad writer in 1750-ish, in Bristol, this one, and he'd just written a ballad, or you'd just written a ballad called the Bristol Garland. Now there's several ballads with that title, Bristol Garland, on the little booklets, chapbooks. This particular one, the story goes, a merchant had 2 sons and a daughter, and you might recognise something there already. And the daughter falls in love with the servant, and the 2 brothers are not happy with this, of course, don't like the idea of somebody else taking their inheritance. So they press him off to sea, which is maybe not what you were expecting. And he goes off to sea, and the plot is similar to many other ballads. And then he comes back, he's made his fortune, and he marries the girl, and everybody's happy with that eventually. So the point here is it's a very positive ending to the ballad. Now you're that same ballad writer, and you come across, you're looking for more material. That's done very well, that ballad. It's sold quite well in Bristol and a few other places as well. In fact, the version I've got actually comes from a Newcastle collection. So that ballad went well, so you want something similar, because that's what a lot of the ballad writers did. If something sells well, they'll do something similar, see if that sells well as well. Makes sense. And you decide to have a look around, and you come across an old broadside that has a prose broadside that tells the story of Boccaccio's Decameron, or want some of the tales from it, and it's the tale of Isabella and the Pot of Basil, and you think, ooh, that's similar to the one I've written, but it's much more gory and much more interesting. So you decide to take that and write that into a ballad as well. But those of you who know Bruton Town, the murdered servant man, which I'm sure most of you do already, it's the same story as I've just told, except that the 2 brothers actually murder the servants, and it ends up badly for them as well. So he decides to write this story of Isabella into a ballad, but he thinks, now this is where places come in. He thinks it's a very negative sort of ballad, it's a very gory ballad. I'll not set it in Bristol this time. I'll think of somewhere what Bristol people will know. It's got to be another port, because it's about a merchant who's sending factor off to in his ships. So what's the nearest port to Bristol? As far as I know, about 20 miles away, Bridgewater is a port then, fairly important. And so he decides to set it in Bridgewater. Ballad again sells quite well. It's passed around Somerset and some other counties as well, and gets into oral tradition. But it gets to the people of Bridgewater, and the people of Bridgewater are not very happy with this horrible ballad being set in Bridgewater. So they decide to change it in oral tradition, and they change it to Bruton, which again is about 5 miles away from Bridgewater. And so all of the oral versions that have been collected, just about all of them anyway, in the Somerset area, around the counties around Somerset, actually, say in Bruton Town, there lived a merchant who had two sons and a daughter dear. But the ballad also spread all the way to America, where much longer, it had deteriorated quite a lot, and down to about 6 or 7 stanzas from 22 stanzas in Somerset area. In America, though, it blossomed, lots and lots of versions, far more versions in America than there are in Britain. And two of the versions in America are almost full versions, nearly the full thing, and pretty close, well, one surmises that they're pretty close to the original, as they have about 20-22 verses. Now, the ballad doesn't actually survive in print, not in this country anyway. There is a broadside, a later broadside in America, but it doesn't survive in this country. So what I've come up with a theory, and I've got other things that can back it, but it is just a theory, that the ballad writers, if they were writing a positive ballad, something on a positive subject, they would set it in the place where they were going to flog the ballad. If it was a negative thing, then, like including murders and rapes and all that sort of stuff, then it would, they would set it somewhere else. Usually somewhere fairly close so that people would still know where it was, but not in the place where it was being printed and mainly being sold. And that's just a theory I've got. I've not backed it up with lots of number crunching, but I have seen lots of examples. For instance, think of The Cruel Mother. Child ballad, number 20. It's the earliest version we have was on a broadside, and there's no reason to believe that that wasn't the original. Printed in London. Obviously, infanticide is the main subject, and the girl the lady who has the two babies ends up going to hell in the ballad, and it's written as a warning, obviously, to young ladies, well-heeled young ladies, and it's set in York, not in London, which is presumably where it was written. So that's another example. Another example, interesting, coming into Yorkshire now, because most of the examples I've got are from Yorkshire. If we look at the ballad that I'm sure all of you folkies who are in the audience will know, a song called Willie Went to Westerdale, made famous by the Watersons. Anyone not heard of it? Willie Went to Westerdale? Good, right, okay, that saves me a lot of time. Right, it is actually a version of a very widespread song called, like what in my master title, it's called Robin a Thrush. And it's a very negative ballad, although it's a comic ballad. It has also got a lot of scatological ideas in it. It's about this very sluttish housewife who's very lazy and won't do things. Very unusual is Willie Went to Westerdale one. Westerdale, for those of you who don't know the geography of the Esk Valley, it's right at the very top. It's very remote and it's a tiny hamlet. Westerdale, tiny hamlet, right at the top of the river, of the valley. Where was it collected? Well, very, very well sung and well known at the mouth of the river, where you've got Whitby and Slights and lots of people around there know the song and sing the songs. Friends of mine sing it. I've collected versions around there in the 60s and 70s. And so what we've got there then is an very old song. The origins, I've traced some of the origins back to the 17th century, and the scatology that's included in the Willie Went to Westerdale version is absolutely nothing compared with the terrible things in some of the stuff that's going back into the 17th century. Even I was disgusted, and that says something. Yeah, so what you've got there is this quite horrible ballad of this lady who comes from Westerdale, and obviously somebody living around the mouth of the Esk. That particular version is not found anywhere else, although obviously Robin a Thrush is universal pretty much. So that's another example. I'm suggesting there is that somebody in the lower reaches of the valley had written that, had put that version together and decided Westerdale, so let's pick somewhere pretty remote that's right at the valley, and we'll give it about Westerdale. Willie went to Westerdale. He married a wife and he brought her home. All right, what have we got next? Another example. Yeah, this is an interesting one. We have a song in East Yorkshire, and it's a hybrid. It's a very widely and very old song. In fact, both songs that come into this hybrid are both very old. And well, I'll sing the first verse, and you'll recognise some of it certainly. How does it start? Brian O'Lynn, he had a grey mare, her back were up and her ribs they were bare, the lash of her tail cut through her odd skin. She's a rum un to kick, says Brian O'Lynn, with me follow the Larry, flare away Mary, pull your odd barrow to Lockington Fair. Most of you will know the tunes idea. That obviously is a variant of the tune anyway, in the chorus, of the ubiquitous Richard of Taunton Dean, Dickie of Taunton Dean, from down south. So what we've got there is actually a hybrid, because there's two things there. You've got Brian O'Lynn, obviously, which goes back to the 16th century. It was known as Tom O'Lynn in Scotland, and it was a skit on the Highlandman sung by the Lowlandman. Tom O'Lynn was a Highlandman born. And that's mentioned in the Complaints of Scotland, 1549, so it goes back a long, long way. I think the other song, the Old Grey Mare, doesn't appear in many actual folk song collections because it's a little odd ditty. It's not very long, it's a bit nonsensical, there's not much to it, but it is very old, and it occurs more in sort of local dialect collections and not in many of the big collections by Sharp and Lucy Broadwood and people like that. It doesn't occur in any of their collections. But it is widespread, and we've got loads and loads of versions of it in Yorkshire. Coming back to the place name idea, oh, by the way, the hybrid, I would reckon probably, even though both songs are very, very old, they both go back to the 16th century. I think probably the hybrid is no older than about 1900. And the hybrid has come about because that first verse that I sang there actually occurs in Brian O'Lynn and in the Old Grey Mare. So you consider it a floating verse, perhaps, a commonplace. Where does the Old Grey Mare come in? Right, well, it comes in, it's in the British Library in a manuscript of the time of Henry VIII. The right handwriting is in the time of Henry VIII, and it's John Hunk's Mare, it's called there. And other southern versions, sometimes you get John Cook. It is quite a common one. That's given in the Opie's book, Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes. And there are versions all around the south, and we think perhaps it might have been the progenitor of even of something like Widdicombe Fair, which is also about an old mare. In the north of England, say there are lots and lots of versions in Yorkshire. One thing about the Old Grey Mare is that the sort of 50-odd versions that I've got, not one of them has that they all name the person, or nearly all name the person who owns the mare. The southern versions name the hill that the mare goes up, and northern versions often name the fair where the mare has been bought. And also northern versions often mention the name of the wood as well, where the old mare runs into a wood. And that's the big difference between the southern versions and the northern versions. This is very relevant to place. Southern versions usually go by the title of the name of the owner of the mare, John Hunt, John Cook, etc. And all those versions have the mare going up a hill and falling down and making its will. However, northern versions have gone down a different road. They all have the mare going into a wood and banging its head on a tree, and then all sorts of nonsensical farmyard things follow on from that. And in America, the ballad has got the Old Grey Mare has gone to America, and there again it's accrued a whole long list of different scenarios that are added on to the Old Grey Mare and what happens to the Old Grey Mare. So that's a feature that has place names. So we've got things like Wibsey Fair, the one I sang there, Lockington Fair, Sedgefield Fair. Say that there's different ones all over Yorkshire, and so that's the Old Grey Mare. So very quickly, I'll just do one more. I've got about 20 ballads down here, but yeah, let's have a look. Which one shall we do? Yeah, let's have a go at, very quickly round off with this one. Yeah, the Duke's Hunt, yeah. This one, we go back to 1680 something. It must be before 1688, I think, when George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, was out of favour by then. He was the favourite of Charles II, I think. And when James came to the throne, I think he fell out of favour. He was always doing naughty things anyway, as they all were. And he came up to Yorkshire and came to Helmsley Castle. He had rooms in Helmsley Castle, which wasn't completely ruined by then. And he liked his hunting, and he went on the Bilsdale hunt, which is now the Sinnington hunt, so it's still there. And in fact, they still sing the song there as well. And then when he went back to London, he had his retainers with him and everything. And he'd been on this hunt, and one of them decided to get a ballad written about this, a typical hunting song. Sue will maybe mention some of these as well. A typical hunting song telling about a day's hunting, and it usually names everybody who went on the hunt and all the different places they went through. And that's probably one of the earliest examples of that is the fox chase, or the Duke's Hunt, printed in about 1682-83. We know it was before 1688 because George Villiers was actually on the hunt when he fell off his horse and was taken into Kirby Moorside and died there in a pub. We know that's where the song came from. The song is there, printed, it's on the UCSB website. And the song was reprinted by White of Newcastle, if not other people as well, in the 18th century. And it got into oral tradition fairly early on, I should imagine, and eventually was shortened like they are down to broadsides like Dido Spendigo. Dido became Dido Bendigo when Bendigo the boxer got famous. And we got Dido Bendigo, I'm sure most of you have heard of Dido Bendigo, and that's what happened to that. And lots and lots of place names mentioned in that, of course. One thing about the original was this chap who was one of his retainers who came down must have told the ballad writer all of the names of the places, because in the actual broadside all the places are spelt wrongly, but they are identifiable. You get an OS map out and you follow the hunt, you can actually mark up all these places that are in, even though they're different spellings. And then became Dido Bendigo. The ballad was printed in Newcastle by White, and different versions evolved from that. There's a Hexham version of it. And moving on nicely into our next talk, the Waterstones sang Dido Bendigo, of course, and they also sang another version called Swarfell Rocks, which of course is set in the Lake District. And I reckon it's moved across from Newcastle to Hexham, and then moved over into the west side for the Cumberland hunt there, and Swarfell Rocks is set there, and that's where I'm finishing. I'm passing on soon. Thank you.
Great start to the day. We've got a few minutes for questions, if anybody wants to... Brad.
I'll come back up there.
Yeah,
sorry, Steve. You'd get away with that, wouldn't you? Yeah. I was just, the mention of Robin a Throat took my fancy, because it was one of the ones we used to sing with the radio at school, although not the highly scatological version, unfortunately. Just wondered if there were place names in any of the other versions, or whether it was just the folk of Westerdale who thought it needed a place.
I can't think of any, actually. Yeah, it's a good question. I could check easily, because every time I do something on a ballad, I get every version and put them all together. I can easily check it, but not at the moment.
Okay.
I can't think of any that do. They're all fairly generic, I think, really. Yeah, even the American ones. Yeah, John.
When you talked about the people writing the ballad for the hunt, you talked about them as if they were separate professional songwriters.
Yeah.
Is that what you expect in all cases, or do you, later in the 19th century?
I would say the vast majority, yes. They were doing it for their shilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were semi-professional songwriters that had that trade as well. So
The further you go back, the more professional they were, yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
So obviously that was their job in the 17th century.
Yeah.
They made a living out of it. And
Steve?
I wonder how much of this is a sort of prosaic notion of rhyme and metre. And, you know, Willie went to Westerdale works because of the alliteration, and Westerdale.
very likely, yeah.
You know, there can't have been.
But I'm sure there are other W starting places nearer to Whitby.
Yeah.
Willie went to Whitby.
Willie went to Whitby, yes.
Yeah,
Westerdale.
missing a
more
syllable.
syllables.
Yeah.
Willie went to Wandsworth, doesn't really. but,
Well, he came from Wandsworth, wasn't
but also with rhyme, there was a lady lived in York. She fell in love with the
Father's
place.
class.
So she had to live in York.
Nearly rhymes, nearly rhymes. Yeah. Well, yeah, that might have been, well, why they chose York, but it wasn't, the fact is, it wasn't London, it was somewhere else.
Yeah, but you can't really rhyme anything with London. There was a lady
Undone.
in London.
That's how I got undone. Undone. Your mind, David. Yeah.
Just expanding on Steve's point, because I also thought of the alliteration. It makes you question with that sort of song which came first, Westerdale or Willie. Because if your theory's right, and I like the theory, Westerdale came first, and it wouldn't be Johnny went to Westerdale, it had to be Willie went to Westerdale. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'd never know probably, but yeah, it's possible. Yeah, certainly so. Yeah. It's funny you should mention that. I've just been reading David C. Rubin's book, very, very detailed. It's mainly about psychology of ballads and the Balkan things, the epics and stuff like that. But there's some really good stuff on ballads in there, and one of the, and it goes into really great detail on what constitutes a ballad and what are the characteristics, properties of ballads. And one of the things he mentions in quite good detail is alliteration and assonance and all the other stuff as well. Yeah.
Any more for any more?
I just thought it was very interesting that almost what you were saying is there's a place name in the song, but it's very likely to prove it wasn't written there, but somewhere else.
If it's a negative subject, yeah. I say I haven't actually number crunched that. I'm only come across a lot of it, you know, just occurred to me as I was going through those particular songs. You know, that's could be, you know, it's just a theory.
Yeah, I think we probably have to be quite careful about assuming the place of writing is equivalent to
Yeah.
the place of printing.
Well, how else would you do it? What would you do?
Might already be printed somewhere.
Well,
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm talking about the original, yeah, or the assumed original.
assumed original.
How would you say that would work, say, in the 17th century, if somebody was writing a ballad, wouldn't they be near the printer?
Well, it would be in the 17th
Yeah.
century. It would be
Well,
in London.
18th century perhaps as well, in Bristol,
London for
Manchester.
first half, probably, possibly Newcastle.
Well, I mean, even in the 19th century, you've got people like John Morgan and George Brown who lived in London,
Yeah.
to be near the printers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Well.
I mean, ballads that are historical, true, you know, they're written on a particular account, are usually written in the place where, like for instance, the ballad Spurn Point, on Spurn Point, it's a whole newspaper article, it's almost word for word the ballad, so somebody local must have...
I'm thinking more of all those...
the more generic ones.
The more generic ones, the Cambridge tragedy and the
they could have been written anywhere.
They could have been written anywhere. Yeah. No, that's really interesting.
But more likely to be near the printer, so, you know...
More likely to be near the printer.
Get the shilling.
So the major printing centres. Yeah, that is true.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Okay,
Recorded
so
it
sorry
on.
about that.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
Anyway, the reason I went off piste is because, unlike Steve, I find the idea of sense of place very exciting. And I did a lot of studying about place and sense of place in the 90s. And so I suddenly found myself back in that place and looking at what some of you may or may not know is a particular branch of philosophy called phenomenology. I looked into phenomenology in place. And I got really excited and went down multiple rabbit holes before I brought myself back. But I think I just want to reflect or offer some reflections about place before we get on to John Peel. He illustrates a lot of it, but onto place. It's not just a geographical location. That's the point. It can be described as an environmental locus that in time and space draws together individual or group actions, experience, intentions and meanings, drawing them together both spatially and temporally. So a place has a history as well as a geography, basically. What is phenomenology? God, I knew this would happen. What has phenomenology got to do with this? Well, it was taken on board by certain human geographers, and I know these are going to be mentioned later today, Yifu Tuan and Edwards, Rolfe and Casey, and more recently David Seaman and the late Doreen Massey. And what their take on phenomenology. Phenomenology can be characterised as understanding grounded in experience. It's about our interpretation of the world, our very personal interpretation of the world, to explore and describe things as they are. And I got very involved with Martin Heidegger and senses of being and a life world. I like the idea of a life world. We all have different life worlds, and they have a place and they have a time and they have meanings for us. So phenomenology seeks to reveal, to describe and interpret. So, but I don't want to do Martin, I'm not going to talk about phenomenology from here, right? It's about these geographers and the way they took this on board. And Doreen Massey argued that what's special about place is not some romance of a pre-given collective. I should have moved on, sorry. Yeah, the what's, when's and where's. It's not a pre-given romance, which is difficult because when you talk about Lake District, everything's romantic with a capital R, but rather it's to do with the intersecting of human stories. In what's an echo maybe of Heidegger's concept of thrownness, she talks about the thrown togetherness of a history, culture, activities and lives lived here. And I love this expression, that I write it on there, a history and a geography of thens and theirs. Now I could spend all day investigating just that expression, it's lovely. And she coins the term the event of place, to describe somewhere that multiple trajectories of human experience coincide and are overlaid on one another, creating a rich palimpsest of experience, cultures and history. What's this got to do with song? What's it got to do with John Peel? I hear you all thinking. Well, folk songs and place, putting aside the phenomenological aspects for a minute, we can regard it as referring to a place. We can talk about coming from a place, written in a place, collected in a place, but it might be the listener's experience of a place. It might be that this song reminds them of a place, somewhere of significance to them in the past, and there could be other possibilities. And a lot of it's to do, therefore, with our own personal place attachment. My place attachment to Cumbria, in case you hadn't guessed my place. North Cumbria. This pub's significant. Always my horizon looking south has been the northern fells of the Lake District and Skidder poking over there and looking downwards to the Solway Plain, except I can't see that from my house. But what your attachment to place is a significant place. And this is significant to me, because I was born there, and also because I'm related to John Peel. I don't think I'm proud of it, but there you go. So if a human being is being in place, then my place, my life world is Cumbria. And when it came to doing my PhD study, my thesis on folk song in Cumbria, I opened with the story of John Peel song that I'm going to cover, but more briefly than I was originally, because the story of the song picks up a lot of themes about folk songs going in and out of print, changing as they move through the years, but also it was an attachment to, it was a participant observer study, because I'd been singing in this pub, the folk sessions. That's where I first came across the Sun Inn at Ireby, the folk sessions that was first introduced me to Cumbrian songs. But it's also the place that John Peel's father ran back in the day. It was quite a shock to find out. It's important to me, and it's where I met my husband as well. So I'm thinking, whoa, this is significance of place attachment writ large. So that's all the personal stuff and the phenomenological bits mostly. Folk songs in Cumbria, I identified all of those. I've used a romantic image of the Lake District there, because you just do 18th century engraving, and it's influenced our image of the Lake District rather too much perhaps. So I'm not going to read all that, you can read that. I don't know what number slide I'm on now, because this doesn't say the numbers, so I've kind of lost in place. That's the basic background. This is a bit of context on hunting. It was started off literally as killing vermin, killing foxes, local farmers in a dale, bringing hounds together, especially in spring when it was lambing season, and especially in the 18th century when flock sizes of sheep expanded enormously. But as it grew popular, it became sport. So by the end of the 18th century, it was a sport. Minor gentry, clergy, and everybody would join in. Very much a cross-class pursuit and a very social pursuit. This is a hunting horn competition, obviously, but there were singing competitions, and still are occasionally. Now, the Lakeland hunts, of course, hunt on foot. It's not Oscar Wilde's hunting pink people in the shires, the oh, you know the quote. I can't remember it, I didn't write it down. Yeah, the unspeakable. Chasing the uneatable. Yes, but it wasn't like that. They were up and down Dale on foot. This is Edmund Porter of the Eskdale and Ennerdale. Though in John Peel's day, they did also use horses because they covered a wider area. Who the hell's John Peel? Do you ken him? When I first did a talk on Cumbrian song at Newcastle TSF, 2008 at the university, I said everyone thinks it's the only song to come out of Cumbria, and a whole cohort of students just looked blank at me. Obviously didn't know the song because they thought I was talking about this guy. I wasn't. Actually, because of times moving on, they wouldn't now. They wouldn't know that John Peel, frighteningly. It's this fella. He was a small farmer, Caldbeck, born 1777, lived for most of his life at Russet near Ireby. A small farmer, a horse dealer, partly a huntsman. He made his living at it, but it was certainly his absolute obsession to the... and part of what the National Dictionary of National Biography says, it said he was good on the hunting front, but he was a coarse, heavy-drinking, rather selfish man, albeit one who could be generous and passionate. Or as my great-grandmother used to say, I didn't know why folk makes such a fuss about John Peel, he was nothing an old drunkard. By the time he died, he was aged 79, his legendary hunts were not only celebrated locally, but nationally, solely because of the song written about him by the cheerful chappie up here, who is John Woodcock Graves, who lived in Wigton nearby and hunted with Peel. This is Graves' house in which he wrote the song, and that's the pub in Caldbeck where it was sung. And he wrote very romantically about it, about 25, 30 years later, about how he'd written this song, and Peel cried, tears were streaming down his cheeks. And he said to Peel, by Jove, you'll be sung when we're both run to earth. And of course he was actually right. He was correct. And it had a long history. The tune had a very long history. And the best analysis of that, you're right, is the Anne Gilchrist in the 1941 journal, where she dates it actually before that. 1695, it was in Playford as Red House. It's also been collected in Wales. I can't pronounce or even remember what its Welsh title was. And the Scottish versions, which was the Woodcock Graves would have heard that one, were, date back to Alan Ramsay. So it was a multi-use, multi-purpose tune, because tunes evolved and went through all sorts of borders, and they're far more ephemeral than the text. You can't pin them down. Not for nothing are they called airs. They're that ephemeral. But the first time we find the tune written down as John Peel was in John Rooke's tune book. And that, what you can't read, the scribble in the corner says, most of the tunes in the book were copied out from printed sources. And that says, from memory. So John Rooke heard that in a pub near Wigton being sung. And that was in 1840. It was only written just after 1830, but by 1840 it was already printed in street literature, printed in Newcastle chapbooks and broadsides. And the quote from Sidney Gilpin, who is actually a Carlisle publisher and printer called George Coward, he wrote under the name of Sidney Gilpin. And he said that, and when he put his book together, he wrote to Graves, who by this time was in Tasmania after the last of his unlucky business ventures bombed, and he got permission, because there were so many versions circulating, as you might imagine, and they decided on a version to print in the book. After that printing, it then took off in lots of other ways. The song takes wing. Those spaces I didn't put in. My proofreading goggles go mad with this. This was putting this into this format to make them in spaces. So there's, published in Stokoe, but it was Metcalfe's version that first sent it on its way, even though his arrangement was appalling. And in fact, everybody else since him reverted to the original tune. He wanted it as a concert piece with piano. And I did have here the Border Regiment playing it. It was their quick march, and they took it all over the empire, basically. I don't want it, though. If I do two, will it go on?
I think you just press it and it will.
Yeah, okay. So into the 20th century, it was the National Songbook, of course, that you really made it take off, because it was adopted as a community song, it went into education, and the National Songbook was printed in editions right up to 1958, I think. But Stanford changed it. He went back to more original tune, but his collaborator on the project, A.P. Graves, who was a lyricist, Irish poet and educationalist, he altered some of the words, and this is where his coat so gay crept in, because Graves thought that huntsmen all wore bright reds and all the people hunting, and they didn't. It was a coat so grey. It was Herdwick wool coat that was woven in Caldbeck, where people came from. So the gay crept in. They changed Caldbeck to Troutbeck and omitted the verse that started, "Do you ken that bitch whose name is Death?" I mean, not surprisingly that they omitted that, but it was definitely rewritten, and that's the version you all know. It was still a Cumbrian song, identified. John Graham calls it the anthem of Cumbria, and Cumbria as a county wasn't formed till 1974, but that's, there is a piece in Peter Dawson recording that I'm also not playing to you, and all of that. But the best recording is the one that was on Pass the Jug Round, which were some recordings made in 1953 in pubs near Carlisle. This is the 1954 centenary celebrations in Caldbeck. Look at the number of people there, it's amazing. I did this talk, or similar, in West Cumbria, and afterwards some guy came up to me all night and said, "Can you get back to that yen with short to fork in Caldbeck?" And I said, "Yeah, okay," he said. And he said, "I was that lad." Great, absolutely great. And Mickey Mosscrop in 1953, sang the best version. I'd like to give you a verse if I've time. I wish there was a clock in here.
So
I
I
better.
need to actually do it with this, is that okay?
Oh
Do
yeah,
it
go
for
on,
you?
please do. And can I just click on after that?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'll be
okay.
able to see if I can set this in motion for you.
I just want a verse and a chorus. Oh right, I see. If not, never mind. You know the song.
It's just,
Well, I've just come in.
Yes. He stopped.
People flow in, and Jack Mons here asked me what I do with these +4s on. Well, in the post office on our way of +4s. But now ever I'm finished with that work for the day, so I'm going to sing a John Peel. Dick and John Peel, with curtsy grey, Dick and John Peel, at the break of the day. Dick and John Peel, on his far, far
I
away.
expect you to join in the chorus.
In the morning,
On the sound of his horn brought me from my bed, and the cry of his hound that he oft times led. On Peel's halloo, what a taken the dead, or the fox from his lair in the morning.
just press on.
and I followed Jack.
I just haven't time to do that. Okay, so here we go. That was the wrong one. I've gone on too many. Oh. Okay, no, I'll have that. So John Peel's been through all those iterations. Does it still work as a signifier of Cumbrianness? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it does. The tune has carried it through 200 years, that song. So it's a powerful tune, and I think it was Richard Hoggart that said songs survive only if they've got the right mix of sentiment and tune, and particularly the good tune will carry it on. And what a grand tune that is, with its, you know, held note at the top. People love singing it. So that is a reason for it, but I'm not sure, that's Caldbeck down there, I'm not sure it still signifies what it did. As David Atkinson has written, I was going to cut this quote, but since he's here, I can't. Tradition expresses a relationship between the past and the present, which is both continuous and discontinuous, both real and imaginary. And we all construct, that was the quote, and we all construct a narrative about ourselves and about the place we relate to. And it's a narrative that's both real and imaginary, where imaginary means the unseen aspects that a phenomenological reflection might be able to pull out that palimpsest of ourselves within the landscape and our significant places. But whether it's still Cumbrian, I don't know, because the place we call Cumbria has changed. The Lake Districts move on. People still go to the traditional places, the Wordsworth, Dove Cottage, they do on the walks, that Coleridge's walk mapped out for them. They do all that, but larger numbers flock to the Beatrix Potter Peter Rabbit attraction in Bowness. And even more go up the fells with their mountain bikes or whatever, wild camping and wild swimming in places they shouldn't, leaving litter behind them, hang gliding over the lakes, and even more again, people will be found in the shops, bars and restaurants of Ambleside and Keswick. So historically, we find, even as far as back as the 18th century, it's somewhere that served many purposes for many people, and often competing clienteles, as the song has, and it continues to do so today, despite having such a great tune. It had the right combination of sentiment and melody to give it a long and varied life and ensure its place in the Northern English canon. I thank you, and that's it.
I have a feeling that when I first came across the song as a child, I thought that Mr. Peel's first name was Ken. But
Yeah, well, that's the Kipper's version. Do you know Ken Peel?
yeah, no, well, I'm thinking back further than that. Anyway, any questions?
Stunned into silence.
Support phenomenology?
Sorry?
we have some more phenomenology perhaps?
What now? No. In future talks, maybe. But I think it's this my involvement in this, and that's where my studies came about, and even my look at folk song, because none of us can really work with subject-object dualism, if you like, going a bit. That phenomenology accepts that it's part of a relationship, and it's an interpretive relationship. We'll all interpret this conference different, I bet.
Steve?
Do they still have hunt suppers and things in your area?
They do, but they're not publicised. I don't think there are hunting song competitions. They used to be publicised in the local papers. And that's partly, mainly, entirely, because of hunt sounds. They're terrified, especially the Blencathra hunt, which is the sort of the one that descended from John Peel's hounds. It's a bit too near the M6. So they wouldn't have... I asked Barry Todhunter, which is a great name for a huntsman of a pack. His name is Todhunter. Yeah, exactly. And Todd being fox. And I said, oh, can I have your calendar, your card, with, so I could identify the singing ones. And he was so cagey. He wasn't going to give it me until he found out. So they're very, very wary. But they do still go on. They do still go out exercising hounds, as they call it, following drag hunts.
Is there
But
anything at all,
small.
like in this area, for instance, it's almost died out.
Right.
As far as the hunt people themselves are concerned, because the farmers have lost interest.
Yes,
the farmers
they have.
used to be
It
their
is the
audience.
same.
They don't
It
want
is
to
the
know
same.
anymore
Yeah.
in West of Sheffield. And the people who are like Will Noble and his friends are now, their audience is the folk scene, as opposed to the farmers, and the farmers don't want to know anymore.
Yeah. That is the case in Cumbria, that a lot of them don't want to know. But equally, there's so many sheep. There are fewer sheep now, actually, since Foot and Mouth in 2002.
Do you see anything of the girl, she might even be here, Emma, is it Emma?
Oh, no, I know who you mean. Not
she
Emma.
did a lot of studies.
Steve.
Mary
Emmett.
yeah.
Mary Emmett.
Mary Emmett, that's
I don't
right.
see her. But
she came and we discussed, she came to our house and we discussed some of that.
Area.
And she was saying a lot of the tunes and a lot of the stuff that's still being written is mainly, rather than being based on older stuff, is being based on sort of like Irish country and western tunes and played on keyboard.
That was always the case, though.
Always the case, right.
I remember going to a hunt supper, I think it was Blencathra, a sing-song in a pub at Bassingthwaite, and it was, it was the likes of Old Aberdeen and Old Shep and all of those things. They all loved the country and western style. But there were a couple of young lads in the Cumberland Farmers Hunt who did write new stuff. There's a great one about the puppy son to the tune of Seasons in the Sun. And it was wonderful, but I don't think it quite... Tally ho, our bonny pup will grow to be a fine English foxhound, and hunting he will go. It worked very well, and, but it didn't seem. But then I didn't continue through. I didn't follow through seeing these people after I moved from Caldbeck. To be honest, I went and had babies and started bringing up children instead.
There's a parallel in Hull, where I'm from. We did actually collect a couple, very lucky to just collect a couple of what we would call traditional songs of the old type. But in the 1920s, all of the trawlermen, without fail, went over to country and western.
Yeah.
So nothing else.
Well, it's like going round Ireland, I remember, in the 70s.
Yeah.
Everyone was...
Galloway, that's what they sing, the pop
Galloway,
music
yeah.
now,
Yeah.
Country and western.
And do they still, when they do sing G. Ken Johnson?
Oh yeah, I think it would kind of finish off an evening. It's still regarded as the... And if there is a Cumberland merry neat, maybe a village will put on, oh, what can we do to raise money for the church roof? Oh, we'll have one of those merry neats. But it's framed as something very different from what a merry neat used to be. But they would incorporate bits of dialect, bits of songs, long rambling jokes and stories, and they'd always finish with, John, give us John Peel now, and they're, you know, they're all, but that's a certain age of person, and that's gonna, I
Because
think it'll stop.
I can never remember ever hearing it as any sort of folk event.
No, well, I think, I actually...
Even though everybody, people of a certain
I know.
age here will
I
know.
actually, in a bit that I actually omitted from this, I did say it never took on at all with folk clubs in the revival of the 60s and what have you. And I think it's because the folk then regarded it as a school song, so they weren't going to do it. And then later, in more recent decades, nobody wants to do hunting songs because nobody wants to know anything about hunting. So it's suffered from both of those things, and the old people are dying off.
Question over.
Oh, right.
It's not a question, it's a lovely job. And it's great to see phenomenology and church and stuff here. But a word in defence of country and western and Irish music. It's only folk music.
Yes. Yeah.
Where did the streets of Laredo come from?
Yeah.
You know? It all goes down to one huge big circle. And if you listen to the Sheffield carols, you can hear all kinds of tunes from all kinds of places. And the music hall as well. You know, it's all wonderful.
Steve, Mr. Turning to assume more, please.
Just on a, not quite a separate subject, but well, it's very, very relevant to place. Do they use the word anthem for particular places, you know, to name a song to a particular place? Do they actually use the word anthem?
No, I mean, that last time would be that 1910 reference. I don't recall anyone saying that. Well,
it's very common in Yorkshire.
The Dialect Society might have said it, you know, it's the anthem of Cumbria, or they'd say Cumberland. Yeah. It is common. Well,
common in Yorkshire. Yeah.
Well, like the Home First.
Yeah, but there are quite a few others.
There are others. Oh, right. No, it isn't common. No.
Are your studies available online?
Am I what?
Your dissertation, is it?
My thesis is on my. Wait a minute. Oh, you can't see it very. That's my academia page. Okay, cool. Thank you. Right, if you search for Sue Allen, it's Alan academia. It'll probably just turn up on Google. Yeah, and it's on there. You've got to scroll down to the bottom, I think, and it's downloadable there.
Okay, anyone for any more? Well, thank you both for an excellent session.